Back with me today is chairman of the Ullman Group and senior advisor at Washington, D.C.'s Atlantic Council, Harlan Ullman. Harlan, great to have you back.
Always a pleasure, Liz.
Harlan, how significant is this arrest?
Oh, very. In the fact that they managed to get, obviously, one of the perpetrators. They'll be able to question him, and whether they'll be able to roll up any more suspected terrorists remains to be seen. But my sense is that this probably ends the small group, the small cell that were responsible for these attacks, because generally speaking, terrorists are very compartmentalized. They don't like to have too many people to be able to tap into the network, so that if you pick up one or two, you're not going to get the entire bunch. And of course, this is as old as terrorism. So you'll find a lot of these networks very compartmentalized, and even when you run them up, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to dig out all the bad guys in one fell swoop.
Right, and clearly the French and the Belgian authorities are doing something right, because they've been able to follow this back from the attacks all the way up to this terrorist who they arrested. What are they doing that's working?
That's a very good question, because it certainly was not working before. One of the problems in Europe is the fact that because of the laws and the social structure, changing intelligence information has been extremely difficult. Too often they go through the United States to become the person who really is the in-between way of contacting other agencies. But one of the things that I've recommended is that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, ought to take a much larger role in the exchange of information between and among European countries, since 26 of them already belong to NATO. It seems to me that there has to be a far better integration of intelligence and police information among and between all the countries in Europe, including Russia, by the way, if we are going to be able to deal with these terrorists, because this is a threat that's not going away. It will continue to perturb us. It's not going to be existential in the sense that we're not threatened in terms of the future of our countries, but we are going to see more attacks like this, as the British witnessed for many, many years because of the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. This is going to continue, and it's only through integrated law enforcement and intelligence capacity are we going to be able to minimize its impact.
Right, maybe it's that intelligence capacity that you talk about that'll be the answer to this question. But this suspect already confessed to being who they thought he was. How do we know that he's telling the truth and that he's not some other low-level terrorist or low-life criminal who wants to take credit for this because he thinks that'll get him his ultimate reward?
That's a good question, Liz. I think the answer is pretty obvious. There are going to be all sorts of photography where he has been seen. They'll be able to link him to the bombings at the Brussels airport. So I think his credibility will be fairly easy to confirm one way or the other. And my guess is that he is what he says he is, but we'll be able to, I say we, the proper authorities in Brussels will be able to authenticate that he is who he says he is.
All right, will they also be able to authenticate his claims that they were planning, that terrorist cell was planning to attack France again, not Belgium, but as the French authorities were closing in, they decided it was urgent. They needed to execute their attacks now before they were caught, so they chose that target in Belgium instead?
Yes, I think so. I think that's going to be fairly easy to follow up on, because first of all, it makes sense. They had to do something very, very quickly. The Brussels airport was nearby. And so I think double-checking and triple-checking this will not be terribly difficult. The issue, and I think that this fellow is probably going to reveal an awful lot of information, but I don't think that information is going to have far-reaching consequences simply because of the compartmentalization of these terrorist cells and networks, and they tend to operate independently. So we'll probably learn a lot about general things, but not enough specifically, I don't think, that will lead to other arrests. But we'll see. It's still early days, and the interrogation is just beginning.
Right. Hopefully it's just the beginning of the information that they're getting. Now, Harlan, as you know, this neighborhood in Belgium, the Molenbeek neighborhood, it's known to be a hotbed for terrorists. And maybe, again, this is speaking to what you were talking about before about NATO and information sharing. But a former CIA agent, or analyst rather, criticized Belgium for not working better with other countries in regards to that neighborhood specifically. What does he mean by that?
Well, as I said originally, the interactions between and among intelligence and police services in the various European countries is still very much stovepiped. There are a lot of reasons for that, namely the laws and social behavior. And I think people are afraid that if there is too much interconnectivity between law enforcement and intelligence, then civil liberties will be infringed upon. But at some stage, these stovepipes have got to be broken down. Before September 11, 2001, this country had the same arrangement with stovepipes. It was almost impossible to coordinate, and we've gotten a lot better. We're not perfect, and I think Europe is about a decade behind. But if they are going to take on the issue of these terrorist cells, then there has to be far better coordination between and among the various countries. It just can no longer remain stovepipe if they wish to be effective as a European continent.
Is there any legitimacy to those critics or those questions about individual liberties, especially when it comes to sharing information by the United States or between the United States and European countries? Because I know as Americans, and I probably fall into this category too, I'm not too crazy about the idea of Europe's governments or Europe intelligence agencies knowing all about my life.
Well, that's absolutely true. There's always this question between security and civil liberties. It happens here, the Patriot Act. How far can the FBI go with or without warrants? This is a really critical issue which terrorists are going to exploit, because the more the need for security arises, the more it's likely that civil liberties are going to be impinged upon. And so this is something that has to be done very carefully. And I think that the laws can be so written that without just cause or due cause or probable cause, then civil liberties can be protected. But your point is absolutely right. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to be very worried about any closer collaboration between and among police and law enforcement and intelligence agencies for exactly that reason. And this is one of the things that terrorists can exploit. They're using terror to impose certain crackdowns that impinge upon our civil liberties and our whole way of life, which is a good weapon for them and obviously very difficult for us.
All right, Harlan, let's switch topics, stay on ISIS, but switch geographical locations rather, and talk about ISIS kidnapping cement factory workers, 300 Syrians outside of the capital. This just recently happened. Harlan, why did they do this?
That's a very good question. They could have done it for any number of reasons. They probably did it for blackmail to try and get some sort of a reward or blackmail payment. They may have had other political reasons, and I'm not sure they have come out yet. But they didn't do it just as a whim. And so there was some utility in snatching the 300 cement workers. As I said, they probably wanted to get ransom, or they had some other ulterior motive, which is the reason they did it. And the fact that they let them go suggests that some kind of payment or some kind of quid pro quo had been arranged.
Right, maybe you can clarify that for us, because I know there's been conflicting reports here that some of them were executed, some of them were released. Different reports are stating different numbers on each side. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I can't go beyond any of the reports because it's too early. The reports that I have read suggest that 300 were kidnapped and 4 or 5 were executed for what reasons we don't know. But in all of these situations, we need to wait a bit for all the facts to settle and the dust to settle before we can make some kind of a conclusion. So at this stage, I wouldn't draw any conclusions one way or the other, but I'm sure in a day or two it'll be pretty clear what happened and why it happened. But at this stage, people will just be making wild speculation, and that's not good for any good purpose.
No, we know it's best to wait until the facts and not try to write the story ourselves before we know what it really is. Harlan, it's always great to talk to you. Thanks for being on today. After the break, Obamacare enrollees are sicker than people insured through their employers. And President Obama wants to spend more of our money on opioid abuse. Dr. Kevin Campbell is here next.